My name is Paige Turner, and at 29, I thought I had my life figured out. I was a marketing specialist in Colorado Springs, working long hours at a mid-sized ad agency that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ambition. My colleagues saw me as driven, focused, the kind of woman who color-coded her calendar and never missed a deadline. But behind that calm, polished image was a quiet truth. I was living in my parents' guest house, saving every spare penny for a place of my own. It wasn't exactly the dream. The guest house sat behind my parents' suburban home, a small, one-bedroom cottage with creaky floors, a tiny kitchen, and walls so thin I could hear my dad's early morning news broadcasts through the window. But it was practical. My parents, Gary and Cheryl Turner, had offered me the space on one condition. I'd cover $1,500 a month toward their mortgage until I moved out. It wasn't free, but it was cheaper than renting my own apartment, and it helped me save for my future. I'd told myself it was a fair deal, a win-win. Or at least, it had been. Every morning began the same. I'd brew coffee strong enough to wake the dead, grab my laptop bag, and head into the city. My days were filled with brainstorming sessions, brand meetings, and late-night campaign revisions. I lived by the rhythm of client deadlines and caffeine. At work, I was confident and capable, the go-to problem solver. But once I got home, the silence of that little guest house felt heavier. My parents meant well, but sometimes their check-ins blurred into quiet interrogations. "Are you eating enough, Paige?" Mom would ask through the screen door. "You should think about dating again," Dad would add, as if stability wasn't already my full-time occupation. I'd smile, nod, and promise I was fine. And most days, I was. Until the balance shifted. It started the day my brother Noah came home. Noah was 25, 4 years younger than me and the human embodiment of chaos wrapped in charm. He'd always been the golden boy, easy smile, quick wit, a knack for getting out of trouble just before it stuck. When we were kids, he was the kind who'd talk his way out of grounding by making our parents laugh. But now, he was the kind who needed grounding. He showed up on a Wednesday afternoon, unannounced, lugging a duffel bag and a smell that blended cheap cologne and regret. I found out later he'd lost his bartending job in Denver after missing too many shifts. When I walked into the main house that evening, he was already sitting at the kitchen counter, feet up, scrolling on his phone like he owned the place. "Hey, sis," he said, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Guess who's back in town?" I blinked. "Please tell me you're just visiting." He laughed, like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. "Nah, just need a place to crash for a bit. Things got messy in Denver." Mom, of course, was already at his side, hand on his shoulder. "He's had a rough time, Paige. We all go through it. He just needs to get back on his feet." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But the way Noah leaned back, smirking, made my stomach twist. He wasn't embarrassed. He was comfortable. Too comfortable. That night, as I walked back to the guest house, the air felt heavier. The porch light flickered like it always did, but for the first time, the little house didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a fuse waiting to burn. Over the next week, tension seeped into every corner of our family dynamic. I'd come home from work and find Noah lounging on the couch, watching TV, or heading out with friends while Mom cooked his favorite meals. Dad praised him for taking time to regroup, as if endless nights out were part of some grand recovery plan. Meanwhile, I was still sending that $1,500 each month to cover the mortgage, my contribution to keeping the family afloat. But with Noah back, expenses climbed. Groceries vanished faster, bills piled up, and somehow, my name came up more often in conversations about money. One night, during dinner, I brought it up carefully. "He needs to start contributing," I said, cutting into my chicken. "He's been here for 2 weeks, and he hasn't even looked for a job." Mom frowned. "He's just adjusting, sweetheart. Don't be so hard on him." Dad nodded. "He'll get there. You've got a good job, Paige. You're doing fine." The words landed like a slap. "You're doing fine." As if my hard work meant I could shoulder more, while Noah got a free pass. I smiled tightly and said nothing. But inside, resentment was beginning to take root, slow, quiet, and dangerous. Work became my escape. At the agency, I was leading a campaign for a regional restaurant chain, balancing creative teams, budget meetings, and impossible client demands. It was exhausting but fulfilling, a space where effort equaled reward. Unlike home. Yet, even there, the strain crept in. I'd find myself distracted in meetings, replaying Mom's guilt trips or Dad's subtle digs. My best friend Lindsay Wade, who worked in the same building as an HR consultant, noticed my growing tension. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said one afternoon as we grabbed coffee. I gave a weak laugh. "Family stuff. My brother's back. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" she asked. "The kind where you work full-time and still feel like you're failing at home." She nodded knowingly. "Boundaries, Paige. Set them now. Otherwise, they'll eat you alive." I smiled, promising I'd try. But I knew boundaries didn't work well in my family. Every time I said no, it somehow turned into "you don't care about us." By the end of the month, the imbalance had become impossible to ignore. I caught Noah bragging to one of his friends on the phone about buying an $800 leather jacket, this, while still unemployed. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "Relax," he said. "I'll pay it back when I'm back on my feet." "With what?" I asked. "You don't have a job, Noah." He shrugged, that same grin plastered on his face. "I always land on my feet." I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue. It wasn't just his arrogance, it was how Mom and Dad enabled it. That night, I overheard them in the kitchen talking in hushed tones. "She's being too harsh," Mom whispered. "Noah's just under pressure." Dad sighed. "Paige doesn't get it. She's got her life together, she can help out a little more." I froze in the hallway, their words slicing through me. Help out more. I was already paying their mortgage, working overtime, budgeting every dollar. In their eyes, my stability wasn't something to be proud of, it was a resource to exploit. A few days later, I came home to find Dad sitting on the porch. He looked serious, the kind of serious that usually preceded a family talk. "Sit down, Paige," he said. I sank into the chair opposite him, the wood creaking beneath me. "What's going on?" I asked. He cleared his throat. "Your brother's debts are a little worse than we thought. Some bad bets, some loans. We're trying to figure out how to cover it." I tensed. "How much?" He hesitated. "A few thousand." I could feel where this was going. "And you're telling me because..." He met my eyes. "Because we're family. We help each other out." My chest tightened. "Dad, I already help. Every month. You can't ask me to cover Noah's debts." "I'm not asking," he said evenly. "I'm saying we need to stick together." There it was again, we. But it never felt like we. It felt like me. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning lazily overhead. I thought about my savings account, the one I'd been nurturing for years, watching it grow bit by bit. Every dollar represented sacrifice. Skipped vacations, second-hand furniture, cancelled coffee dates. And now, I was expected to throw it all away because my brother refused to take responsibility. The next morning, when Mom brought up the family issue again, I finally snapped. "I'm not paying his debts," I said firmly. "I love you both, but I can't keep fixing his mistakes." Mom's expression softened, but her words cut deep. "Paige, he's your brother. We're all in this together." I felt my throat tighten. "No, Mom. You're in his mess together. I'm just the safety net." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Dad's voice broke the silence. Quiet, but cold. "If that's how you feel, maybe you shouldn't live here anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just turned, walked back to the guest house, and shut the door. My hands trembled as I locked it behind me. Part of me hoped they didn't mean it, that it was just anger talking. But deep down, I knew better. The imbalance wasn't new. It had always been there. I'd just been too busy, too loyal, too hopeful to see it clearly. And now, the line had been drawn. For the first time in years, The guest house didn't feel like a stepping stone. It felt like a cage, one I'd built myself by mistaking obligation for love. Outside, the Colorado sky stretched wide and endless. I sat by the window, watching the sunset turn the mountains gold, and whispered to myself, something has to change. Because I knew one thing for certain. If I didn't stand up for myself soon, I'd lose everything I'd worked for, not just my savings, but my peace, my dignity, my future. And I wasn't ready to let that happen. I remember the morning everything started to unravel. It was a Saturday, one of those crisp Colorado mornings when the air feels too pure for bad news. I'd just poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down to go through my monthly bills. I prided myself on being organized. Every expense, every payment, every little transaction was tracked. But that morning, something strange appeared on my credit card statement. A $5,000 charge from a tech store in Denver. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I didn't even own anything close to that value. I called the credit card company, half expecting a simple resolution. But when they confirmed that the purchase had been made online, using my name, my email, and my billing address, my heart started racing. Someone had used my identity. For the next 2 days, I couldn't focus on anything else. I filed a fraud report, changed passwords, even froze my accounts. It felt like my world was suddenly unstable. I was terrified that someone had targeted me, maybe a hacker, maybe a stranger. Then came the call from the tech store manager. He said, "Miss Turner, the person who picked up the equipment signed as Noah Turner." My stomach dropped. Noah. I didn't want to believe it. Not my brother. Not the same kid I'd defended so many times. But when I drove to my parents' house that evening, I saw the new gaming setup glowing in Noah's room. 3 monitors, custom PC tower, and all. He looked up at me, smiling sheepishly, like he'd just spilled milk instead of committing fraud. "Paige, relax," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I was gonna pay you back. I just needed a head start." I remember standing in his doorway, shaking, not from anger, but from disbelief. "You stole my identity, Noah. Do you even realize what you've done?" Before I could continue, Mom rushed in, her voice defensive and soft at the same time. "Sweetheart, don't raise your voice. He didn't steal anything, he borrowed. He's just under a lot of pressure right now." Borrowed. Pressure. I stared at her, unable to process that she was excusing this. "Mom, this isn't borrowing. This is fraud. My credit could be ruined." Then Dad appeared, arms crossed, silent at first, but his expression said everything. Disappointment, not in Noah, but in me. "Paige," he said sternly, "he's your brother. He made a mistake. Don't make it worse by involving the police or the bank." That was the moment I realized the truth I had avoided my whole life. In this family, accountability had an age limit, and I'd aged out of compassion. The days that followed were pure emotional chaos. My parents acted like nothing had happened. At dinner, Mom talked about church potlucks and Dad about his golf buddies, as if my entire financial stability wasn't in jeopardy. Noah laughed through meals, sometimes even teasing me, calling me Miss Perfect Credit Score. Meanwhile, I was on the phone with the bank every other day, trying to clear my name. I worked late hours, barely slept, and found myself snapping at colleagues. Colin, my co-worker and closest friend, noticed it first. He stopped by my office one evening. "You okay? You've been tense." I wanted to tell him everything, but shame burned in my chest. "My brother stole from me," I finally said, the words breaking out like a confession. Colin didn't judge. He just nodded slowly, his voice calm. "Then you need to stop letting them treat you like their safety net." His words echoed in my mind for days. Safety net, that's what I'd become. Not a daughter. Not a sister. Just a convenient cushion for everyone else's mistakes. A week later, the bank resolved part of the fraud, but not before I had to pay temporary fees and fill out mountains of paperwork. Noah never apologized. Instead, he started avoiding me, sneaking out late, claiming he was looking for work. Then one night, he stumbled home drunk. I heard him arguing with Dad in the kitchen. "You're lucky Paige covers your mess," Dad said, thinking I couldn't hear. Noah slammed the counter. She doesn't do it for free, Dad. She loves the control. She acts like she's better than us. Something in me snapped. I walked into the kitchen, eyes blazing. You think I enjoy this, Noah? You think paying for your lies is control? You're an adult, start acting like one. He laughed, a cruel, careless laugh that cut deeper than I expected. Oh come on, Paige. You've always needed to play the hero. What would you even be without someone to save? I froze. Because part of me knew he was right, not about the cruelty, but about the pattern. For years, I'd been saving them, fixing, paying, forgiving, just to feel needed. That realization didn't comfort me. It shattered me. 2 nights later, I reached my breaking point. Mom came to my door holding a pie she'd baked, smiling like nothing was wrong. We need to talk, honey, she said. I let her in, thinking maybe, just maybe, this would be an apology. But instead, she said, your father and I talked to Noah. He's agreed to sell some of his things to pay you back, but we think it would be better if you dropped the fraud claim. It's hurting his chances of finding work. I laughed bitterly. So I'm the problem now. Mom's face softened, her voice pleading. Please, Paige. His family. You're all we've got. That sentence broke something inside me for good. Because it wasn't true. I wasn't all they had, I was all they used. That night, I wrote in my journal. I knew something had to change. I didn't know what yet, but the quiet resentment that had been whispering inside me was now roaring. I woke up one morning with that tight, heavy feeling in my chest, the kind that doesn't fade, no matter how many deep breaths you take. The sun was already climbing over the mountains, spilling gold across my small guest house, but I couldn't feel any warmth. My thoughts were frozen in that one word echoing from my mother's lips the night before, family. Family. A word that had once meant comfort now felt like a chain. I had stopped eating breakfast with them weeks ago. The cheerful good mornings had turned into awkward silences and side glances. Noah barely looked at me anymore, except when he needed something. Mom tiptoed around the tension, and Dad pretended it didn't exist, classic Turner family strategy. That morning, I checked my mail and froze. There was another letter from the credit company, a reminder that my fraud claim was still under review. It wasn't over. The whole situation still hovered over me like a storm cloud. I remember sitting on the couch, staring at that envelope, when my dad knocked on the door. Paige, can we talk? He said, his tone calm, too calm. I nodded, even though my stomach twisted with dread. He stepped in, holding his coffee mug, wearing that same serious face he used when delivering lectures about responsibility. He didn't sit. He just stood there, towering like a verdict. Your mother and I have been talking, he began. Noah's gotten himself into more trouble. He owes some money, about $10,000, to a friend. We want to help him straighten this out. I stayed silent, but my pulse spiked. I already knew where this was going. Dad took a breath. We need you to step up again, just until he gets back on his feet. I blinked. You're asking me to pay off Noah's debt after what he did to me? Dad sighed, rubbing his temples like I was the unreasonable one. He's your brother. He made mistakes, but he's trying to make things right. We raised you better than to turn your back on family. That sentence, we raised you better, hit me like ice water. All my life, being raised better had meant being quiet, being giving, being selfless to the point of self-destruction. Dad, I said quietly, you're asking me to fix what Noah keeps breaking. You're not helping him. You're enabling him. He frowned, his voice sharpening. Don't lecture me about parenting, Paige. This isn't about enabling, it's about love and loyalty. Love doesn't mean funding someone's irresponsibility, I snapped. Loyalty shouldn't mean losing myself. The air between us thickened. For the first time, my father looked genuinely angry. If you can't help your family when they need you most, he said, maybe you shouldn't live here anymore. My throat tightened. Are you kicking me out? He hesitated, then looked away. We'll call it, setting boundaries. Boundaries. The word stung. Boundaries for me, never for Noah. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there after he left, staring at the wall, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I could hear my parents' muffled voices through the window, the clinking of dishes, the ordinary sounds of a family pretending everything was fine. Inside me, though, something shifted. A quiet, powerful certainty. I was done. That night, I packed. Slowly, methodically. Clothes, laptop, documents, a few photos, not of my family, but of college, of Lindsay and me on that beach trip, of the moments that reminded me I once had a life outside this house. Mom knocked softly as I zipped up my suitcase. "Sweetheart," she whispered. "Your father didn't mean it like that. He's just stressed. We all are." I turned to her, exhausted. "Mom, I've been covering for everyone's stress for years. When do I get to have my own?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Please don't leave angry. This family needs you." I shook my head. "No, Mom. You need me, but you don't value me." There was a long silence. And in that moment, I realized she didn't know how to respond, because she knew it was true. I left early the next morning before anyone was awake. The world was still dark, the sky a mix of navy and pink. My car was cold, my hands trembling as I loaded my last box. I looked back at the guest house, the place I had called home for 3 years, and it didn't even feel like mine anymore. As I pulled out of the driveway, a weight lifted, but a new one settled in its place. Fear. Fear of what came next. Fear of being truly alone. I drove to Lindsay's apartment. She opened the door in pajamas, surprised but not shocked. "Oh my God, Paige, you actually did it." I nodded, my voice breaking. "Yeah. I finally left." She didn't say anything, just hugged me. A real hug, the kind that says you're safe now. For the next few weeks, I stayed with her, slept on her couch, and tried to rebuild some kind of rhythm. I worked extra hours, saved every cent, and looked for a new place to live. The silence after work felt both freeing and lonely. Sometimes I'd scroll through my phone and hover over Mom's number. But every time, I remembered her words, "This family needs you," and how hollow they had sounded. One evening, Colin invited me out for coffee. "You look lighter," he said, studying me across the table. "Like you've finally exhaled." I smiled faintly. I did. But it still hurts. They were supposed to be my safe place. He nodded. "Sometimes you have to walk away from people who love you the wrong way." That sentence stuck with me. Love you the wrong way. It wasn't that my family didn't love me, they just didn't know how to love without conditions. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing little changes in myself. I started journaling again. Cooking for myself. Sitting in silence without the constant hum of guilt in my head. It was as if I'd been holding my breath for years and was finally remembering how to breathe. Then came the call. It was Mom. Her voice trembled. "Paige, your father's not well. He's been worried sick since you left. Can you please come home? Just to talk." My heart twisted. Despite everything, I still cared. That was the hardest part. Cutting the cord didn't mean cutting the emotion. I went. Not because I wanted to go back, but because I needed closure. When I walked into the house, everything looked smaller. The furniture, the rooms, even my father. He sat on the couch, pale and tired. He looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't expect it. I shouldn't have asked you to pay for Noah. You were right." It wasn't a grand apology, but it was real. And that was enough. Noah wasn't home, he'd apparently moved out, chasing another business idea. I didn't ask where. For once, I didn't need to fix it. Dad offered me coffee. We talked about work, the weather, small things. When I left, he hugged me, awkwardly, but sincerely. And as I stepped outside, I realized something powerful. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning. It just means letting go. That night, I drove back to my small rented studio. Barely enough space for one person, but entirely mine. I sat by the window, looking at the stars, and whispered, "I'm finally free." For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. The first few months on my own were the hardest, but also the most honest months of my life. I'd always imagined independence as something loud and triumphant, like the soundtrack of a victory scene in a movie. But in reality, it was quiet. It was waking up to silence instead of footsteps. It was eating dinner alone but knowing peace wouldn't be interrupted by guilt. It was realizing that the calm I'd always craved didn't come from fixing others. It came from finally choosing myself. My new apartment was tiny, 1 bedroom, creaky floors, and a view of a parking lot, but it was freedom wrapped in 4 walls. I furnished it piece by piece, starting with a second-hand couch, a thrift store table, and a small potted plant I named Hope. Every item I bought with my money felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me. I poured myself into work, but for the first time, it wasn't to prove anything. I wasn't trying to be the responsible daughter or the perfect sister. I was just Paige Turner, a marketing specialist who wanted to build something meaningful. My boss noticed my renewed energy and offered me a lead position on a campaign. It was challenging, fast-paced, and entirely mine to manage. There were nights I stayed up past midnight, not because I was anxious, but because I was passionate. I'd forgotten what that felt like. One evening, after a long week, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and thought about how far I'd come. I no longer checked my phone expecting drama. I no longer waited for apologies that would never come. I had stopped living in reaction to other people's chaos. Then my phone buzzed, a message from Lindsay. "Lindsay, dinner tomorrow. I'm buying. You deserve a night out." That small message made me smile. Having people who genuinely see you, not for what you can give them, but for who you are, that's a kind of wealth my old life never offered. Dinner turned into laughter, stories, and a toast. "To freedom," Lindsay said, raising her glass. "To boundaries," I added. We both laughed, but inside, I knew how sacred that word had become to me. Later that night, I posted something on social media, not for attention, but as a quiet declaration of the woman I was becoming. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing peace over pain, and growth over guilt. The next morning, the post had dozens of supportive comments, some from old college friends, others from co-workers who quietly resonated with it. It reminded me that so many people live under the same kind of invisible burden, the pressure to sacrifice themselves for the comfort of others. A few months later, I got an unexpected email from a women's career organization. They'd seen one of my marketing projects online and wanted me to lead a webinar on work-life boundaries and self-worth. At first, I laughed. Me. The girl who used to cry in her car because she couldn't say no. But then I realized, that was exactly why they'd chosen me. Because I'd lived it. I accepted. The night before the session, I sat at my desk rehearsing my story, not as a victim, but as someone who survived her own silence. When the day came, I spoke from the heart. I told them about my brother, my parents, and the guilt that had shaped me. I told them how love without respect becomes control, and how forgiveness doesn't mean letting people keep hurting you. When the session ended, one participant messaged me privately. "I think I just realized I've been living my whole life for other people. Thank you for reminding me it's okay to live for myself." I stared at that message for a long time. It felt like the universe whispering, "You did the right thing, Paige." Around that time, my dad started calling more often. Small talk at first. Weather, work, local gossip. Mom would sometimes join in, her tone softer, more careful. They didn't apologize again, but I noticed a shift. For the first time, they asked how I was doing instead of what I could do for them. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I learned that healing doesn't always come as a grand reunion. Sometimes it's a slow rebuilding, brick by careful brick. As for Noah, I heard through the grapevine that he'd finally taken a steady job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I didn't reach out, but I wished him well in silence. Sometimes letting go means loving someone from afar. A year after leaving home, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting my blazer before heading to my new office. Yes, my office. The company had promoted me to marketing director. The same girl who once couldn't afford her own apartment now led a team of 10. I looked at my reflection, older, calmer, stronger. "I'm proud of you," I whispered. It felt strange saying it out loud, but I meant it. I wasn't the same Paige Turner who had once begged for her family's approval. I was no longer trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. I'd finally given that love to myself. One evening, as I watched the sun dip behind the Rockies, I received a message from my mom. It was simple. "Mom, we're proud of you, Paige. Truly. And we miss you." For the first time in years, her words didn't trigger guilt, they brought peace. I replied with a small smile. I miss you too. I hope you're all doing well." No drama. No resentment. Just peace. That's how I knew I'd healed. I've learned that growth doesn't always look like fireworks or milestones. Sometimes it's the quiet confidence of knowing you can stand on your own. Sometimes it's realizing you don't need to be everyone's savior to be worthy of love. And sometimes, it's simply waking up and feeling safe in your own life. I used to think my story was one of betrayal, of being taken for granted. But now, I see it differently. It's a story of rebirth. Of rediscovering who I am without the weight of others' expectations. And if there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening to my story, it's this. You can't pour from an empty cup. Protect your peace. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying, it's walking away.